You've been the director of the DFF for quite some time, and I know the DFF supports strategic litigation and it wants to advance digital rights in Europe. So I want to take this on a very basic level. So, what are digital rights to begin with?
Digital rights are all our human rights, but as engaged in the digital context. So very basic example, right to privacy. You wouldn't want anyone to open the mail that has been deposited in your mailbox. Likewise, you wouldn't want anyone to read your emails if you haven't given them authorization to do so. And that way, any human right can kind of be translated to the digital context or have implications in that realm.
Okay, thank you. And what are the major obstacles faced by digital rights defenders that you've encountered in your work as the director of DFF?
I guess the one of the main kind of like challenges is the sheer volume of issues. There's so much going on at the same time at the moment, and I think that since we've all had to move even more of our lives online since the pandemic, I think for a lot of people it's become very, very clear how dependent we've become on technology, on digital means to communicate with each other, to work, to learn, etc. Sometimes even access basic services, and there's just a lot of a lot of issues to pay attention to at the same time, and it's a relatively small field of actors. And as always, resources are short, as it is in many different areas of human rights as well. But I think that basically kind of the challenge versus the resources that are available is one of the biggest kind of like systemic things.
Okay. We're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the current issues in digital rights and also freedom of expression, and look forward to it. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Toks Hussain, and we have Nani Jansen Reventlow, who is the director of the Digital Freedom Fund. And we've had a very interesting conversation thus far. Now, why don't we talk about some of the current issues in the digital rights sphere and also freedom of expression? And I think that we can speak about the leaks. And of course, I'm referring to Julian Assange, who's the founder of Wikileaks. As you're recently aware, Nani, here in the UK, in the Old Bailey, it was ruled that he couldn't be extradited to America. And the legal basis was that extradition would be harmful to his mental health. So some people, in essence, think that this was the right decision, albeit for the wrong reason, because they saw it as a missed opportunity to address the matters of um, whistle, being a whistleblower, journalism, etc. And I wonder, Nani, do you think that this was in fact a missed opportunity?
I think I would have to agree with that. I mean, overall, I think press freedom advocates are very relieved that no extradition is going to take place anytime soon. But it would have been really wonderful to have had a strong judgment to basically underline the importance of the type of work that Mr. Assange was engaged in, which is very like the work that many investigative journalists do. And just the mere idea that they could be subjected to extradition requests like this that are based on basically being accused of having hacked into a government system. That can have a potential chilling effect, right, on journalistic, investigative journalistic work. So I think that overall it would have been great if that had been addressed thoroughly in this judgment.
Okay, thanks for your views. Another issue is this. So the UK government is planning to change the law so that social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, etc., become legally responsible. They will have, in essence, a duty of care, um, with regards to the safety of users. So, in light of these pressing issues such as cyberbullying, mental health, hate speech, should social media companies be responsible for their content, in your view?
Um, yes, there is a responsibility, but it all depends on how that responsibility is, implemented in practice, how that's operationalized. I think that one of the biggest problems that we have at the moment with social media companies regulating content on their platforms is the lack of transparency, and also the lack of due process for anyone to actually challenge any decisions to remove content or make it less accessible to the audience that they're trying to reach. Because at the moment already there are community standards, right? There are terms of service that are seeking to kind of make sure that it's a space in which everyone, quote unquote, can engage in debate with each other. But the way that is being enforced is not transparent, and also there where we have seen here and there some leaks, for example, on the way that Facebook, for example, trains its content moderators. There are some serious issues in the sense that the speech of certain groups, and the ProPublica publication on this was very interesting in regard that speech of white men was basically more protected than of specific minoritized groups and marginalized groups online. So there is a lot to be done. And the question is actually, how far do you also want to go in kind of like interfering with how these companies are going to be implementing an obligation like that? Another thing that's important to flag there is that there's a risk of overcautious behavior from these platforms that would kind of like amount to like way too swift takedowns and content removals, for risk of being penalized for not having followed up to their duty of care. And you see that type of impact with legislation like they've adopted in Germany with the NetzDG, which basically makes social media companies responsible for enforcing hate speech legislation. And that's legislation that's been copied already in numerous countries around the world. And it basically incentivizes very active censorship. And I don't think that that is where we want to go either.
Okay. So it seems to me at least that quite a few of these social media companies have their own internal guidance as to how they deal with hate speech, community standards, etc. So do I take it that you don't subscribe to the notion that there should be a universal set of guidance and principles that they ought to follow, or should it be left to the individual social media companies to decide how to deal with these matters? It is their platform after all, right?
Yeah, no. Well, the universal guidance that they should follow is the human rights framework. But I think a lot of it will, in the end, still hinge on how it's being implemented. How much of an investment are these companies making in operationalizing a commitment to a space in which free flow of information can really take place?
Okay, awesome. So let's talk now about another hot topic issue, which is that of misinformation, or fake news, as it's colloquially called. Is there a danger, in your mind, Nani, that the legitimate aim of curbing misinformation may hinder free speech?
Yes, and we see that in practice also, right? In many countries, fake news laws are actually used to stifle dissent, silence opposition, silence critical views, particularly silence critical opinions when it comes to government conduct and policy. While, of course, it's very understandable that, well, it particularly came to the fore in the context of the pandemic most recently. You would want to avoid the spreading of incorrect information about the virus and about measures that can be taken to prevent it, etc. Just deciding to kind of like adopt legislation that's usually formulated in a rather broad way, because try to define what fake news is and under which circumstances something should qualify as fake news. It's often very multi-interpretable and just lends itself to abuse. Instead, governments should really think about other ways of making sure that the right information reaches their citizens and reaches the people. For example, by being more proactive in providing clear and transparent information themselves, and making sure that they do make a proper effort in reaching everyone who needs to be reached. I think that that could be a much more effective way and a much more free speech respecting way than adopting fake news legislation and enforcing it.
Okay. Uh, Let me ask you about the future of digital rights. But before I ask my main question, I'm actually curious about a project in which the DFF has been involved in, which is about the decolonization of digital rights. What does that actually mean to the layperson?
So the project tries to change the power structures that are currently holding the digital rights field in place. It stems from observations from not only us at DFF, but also our project partner EDRI and many in the digital rights field, that when we are having conversations about digital rights in Europe at the moment, the room is rather homogeneous in its makeup. It's mainly white, male, cisgendered, able-bodied, etc. people that are having these conversations, which means that really, really large portions of our society are not represented in these conversations. And that basically means that we're working with a watchdog that's not as able as it could be to defend the digital rights of all in this world. And this is something that we would like to change. Why we use the term decolonizing instead of, for example, diversity, equity, inclusion, or other terminology that is often used, is because when you use the idea of diversity and inclusion, you're basically talking about bringing people into a framework that needs to change much more from a fundamental, on a much more fundamental basis. And this is what we're trying to figure out how we can do that.
Okay, so it's essentially addressing structural changes as opposed to just being on the surface, which is a commendable project to begin with, and I wish you success in it. Now, we frequently hear about devices being hacked or tech companies that accumulate personal data for ads, etc. And I wonder, though, is the future of digital rights bleak? If not, what do we have to look forward to, Nani?
Oh, wow, is the future bleak? I don't think so, not necessarily. I know there's a lot of doomsday writing out there. I still believe that we can fight back and that we can avoid those worst case scenarios. I do think that in order to avoid this bleak future, we really have to kind of make sure that there's a much broader understanding with everyone exactly how like the use of technology and technology being involved in so many aspects of our lives has an impact on our human rights. And that is something that is quite often absent at the moment. There's still overall kind of a feeling that technology is complicated. It has nothing to do with me. If I swipe left or right on an app, it has no actual impact on my life, and I'll accept the terms of service, it's all fine. And I think that kind of like to a large extent is rooted in insufficient understanding of the impact that all this data collection and data sharing has. So we do have our work cut out for us, but I still believe that we can do something to make sure that the future is not so bleak.
Okay, and so for us digital citizens, I suppose we have a duty to take an active interest in our digital rights as well, don't we?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to go on a short break now, and we'll be back in due course.